Welcome back to Cryptic History. Today, I'm going to reveal a secret that could completely change the way you view one of the most famous modern fairy tales in the world. The life of Princess Diana. You think you know everything about her. The shy girl who became a global icon. The people's woman who touched the hearts of millions. But what if I told you that everything you thought you knew about her family is nothing but a perfectly crafted lie? We've always been taught that Princess Diana came from the wealthy and respected Spencer family. It's a beautiful story. But it's just the surface. Because hidden beneath the name Spencer is another bloodline, a darker bloodline. One that holds betrayal, forbidden love, and tragedies buried deep in history. The bloodline I'm talking about isn't Spencer. It's Tudor, yes. The very same Tudor dynasty of King Henry VIII. The dynasty of queens executed, broken vows, and one of the bloodiest periods in English history. You're probably thinking this can't be true. Official history claims the Tudor line ended with Queen Elizabeth I. And on paper, that's correct. But official history is sometimes the most meticulously crafted lie. If you think the Tudor story is over, let me reopen it for you. Our story doesn't start in a lavish palace, but in the shadows, with a woman whose name history has tried to erase. Her name was Mary Tudor, not the bloody Queen Mary, but another Mary, the youngest sister of Henry VIII. A woman of legendary beauty, with fiery red gold hair and eyes that could be both gentle and fierce. Henry loved her. He called her his pearl. But even precious pearls can be locked away. In 1514, Mary was married off to King Louis, the south of France, an old, frail man solely for Henry's political gain. A lively, passionate woman with spirit was thrust into the cold stone halls of a foreign court, surrounded by suspicious eyes and whispered words. But only 82 days after the wedding, King Louis passed away. Mary became a widow. And more importantly, she was free. But that freedom didn't last. Henry would soon decide her next husband, because to him, his sister wasn't family. She was just a pawn on the European power chessboard. But Mary had a promise full of danger. However, Mary had a promise full of danger and betrayal. A vow given to the man she truly loved, Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, the closest friend of King Henry. Charles was not a royal, but he held a special place in the king's heart and had captured Mary's heart completely. They had sworn together that if Mary became a widow, she would choose her next husband herself. Challenging Henry VIII meant a death sentence. But for love, some risks were worth taking. When news of King Louis's death reached England, Henry acted swiftly. He sent Charles Brandon to France with a clear order: bring my sister back home safely. But there was another command unspoken: sharp as a blade, do not touch her. Henry knew of their feelings for each other and trusted that Charles would not betray that trust. As proof, Henry gave Charles a heavy golden signet ring. "This is my trust in you," Henry said. Do not betray it. Imagine Charles on that ship. The cold sea spray hitting his face. The weight of the ring burning in his pocket. He was torn between two loyalties. One to the king who had given him everything. The other to the woman who was the only one who could bring him happiness. Choosing Mary was a gamble with his life. Obeying Henry was betraying his own love. When Charles arrived at the French court, he saw Mary draped in mourning, her room bathed in black velvet. But when their eyes met, the sorrow faded into something else. Recognition, desperation. A wordless plea that night. Mary confronted Charles. She was no longer a shy girl. "Will you marry me?" she asked. It was not a question, but a threat. Charles hesitated, warning her of Henry's wrath, of the Tower of London, of the executioner's blade. He reminded her of the case of Edmund de l'Epole, whom Henry had executed simply because he was a distant threat to the throne. But Mary didn't back down. "If you don't marry me right now," she whispered fiercely, "you'll take me back to England. And I'll be forced into another marriage. And I will make sure the king knows you are the one who rejected me." It was a masterful psychological move. She trapped in the king's fury if he married her, or the king's fury if he abandoned her. And so, in a small chapel on the outskirts of Paris, with only a trembling old priest and a few frightened servants as witnesses, they defied a king. As Charles slipped a borrowed ring onto Mary's finger, a strong gust of wind blew open the chapel door, extinguishing half the candles and plunging the room into darkness. The old priest Gaspard trembled before the omen. They had married, and they had been cursed. As the omen foretold, the journey back to England was a torment. Every creak of the ship sounded like an axe, grinding on a chopping block. Every wave crashing against the side of the ship felt like Henry's fist pounding on the door. They couldn't eat, they couldn't sleep. Letter after letter was sent to the king, pleading for mercy, begging for intervention from Cardinal Wolsey, the so-called second king. They were willing to offer everything. Mary's dowry, even the most priceless jewels, if it meant they could live. But when the ship docked in Dover, the welcome was colder than the sea. No flags, no cheers. Just a few officials, one of them. Sir Giles refused to address Mary as Your Majesty. Instead, he looked at Charles with a mix of pity and disdain. The message was clear. You are no longer a friend of the king. You are a traitor. They were summoned to London not as honored guests, but as prisoners. The story of their secret marriage spread like wildfire. By the time they reached the capital, the entire court was buzzing. And at the center of it all was King Henry VIII. Angrier than ever. This was not just disobedience, not just betrayal, this was a personal insult. Mary was his sister, Charles was his closest friend. Together, they had made a fool of him before all of Europe. And Henry VIII was not the kind of man to forgive someone who made him look foolish. What awaited them was not a royal reunion, but a sentence in Henry's court. Sentences were always written in fear. They were separated. Mary was taken to a magnificent room, filled with flowers and fine food, but the door was locked from the outside. It was a gilded cage. Charles was taken to a bare, stone room with only a single window, looking out at a blank wall. His world shrank to four walls and tormenting thoughts. This was Henry's first move. Not an axe, not a dungeon, but isolation. He wanted fear to eat away at them from within. Weeks passed with no word. No verdict, no forgiveness. Only silence. A silence so heavy, it felt like a living creature. Finally, the summons came, but only for Charles. He was led through the maze of corridors. At Greenwich Palace at last, he was brought to a private office. Sitting behind a massive oak desk was Henry VIII. He did not shout, he did not rage. Instead, he calmly cleaned his fingernails with a dagger, as if Charles's fate were merely a trivial matter. Then, with a voice almost gentle, he said, "Charles, my friend, did you truly think I wouldn't find out?" Henry passed judgment first. There was money. Mary and Charles would have to return every penny of her dowry. They would be nobles in name only, but in reality, they would be beggars. Second, there was the humiliation. They would be forced to publicly remarriage before the entire court, kneeling before Henry to beg for his forgiveness. Their love story would not be remembered as a challenge, but as submission. But the final condition was the cruelest. "Your children," Henry said, his voice as hard as stone, "they will live because I allow it. They will have no royal rights or titles. Their marriage will be decided by me. You want a family born from love. You shall have it, but it will be a family shackled by my crown. You will never be free." Charles left that room broken. He had walked in fearing death, but walked out with a far worse sentence. A lifetime of enslavement to the man who despised him the most. So Mary and Charles lived. They had children, 2 daughters, Frances and Eleanor, who survived to adulthood on the outside. Their life seemed enviable. Silken clothes, lavish feasts. A grand estate, but it was all a performance. A carefully staged play for one audience only. Henry VIII, every decision, every conversation, every guest was watched. Their butler, Master Croft, appeared loyal, but in reality, he was a spy for the king. Westhope Hall, their home, was not a haven, but a prison with flowers on the windowsill. Their children grew up in a strange contradiction. Privileged, but always haunted. They were the granddaughters of a king, the granddaughters of a queen, but they were forbidden from speaking of it. Their royal blood was not a blessing. It was a curse. Frances, the eldest daughter, inherited her mother's fire proud. Strong and fearless, but she too was caught in Henry's web when she came of age. Her marriage was not her choice. It was arranged by the royal family. A carefully orchestrated connection, meant to control the dangerous Tudor blood flowing in her veins. She married Henry Grey, the Marquis of Dorset. A reasonable match, but not a romantic one, and certainly not one built on love. It was a cage with silk bars. Mary and Charles could only watch in agony, as their own defiance, their fight for freedom, was denied through their daughter. This was Henry's revenge. It was not just aimed at them. It was aimed at their children. Francis and Henry Grey had 3 daughters: Jane, Catherine, and Mary. The 3 girls carried both promise and peril in their veins. The most famous of them, of course, was Jane, the clever, bookish girl who would one day be known as the 9 Days Queen. By that time, Henry VIII had passed away. His sickly son, Edward VI, sat on the throne controlled by Protestant lords. They needed a replacement heir, someone with Tudor blood, but who was also Protestant. And they turned to Jane Grey. Jane was only 16. She wanted books, not a crown. She wanted to study, not play politics. But her parents and their allies had struck a deal with the ambitious Duke of Northumberland. Jane would marry his son. Jane would become queen. She cried, she begged, but no one listened. She was swept up in the tide of ambition. In July of 1553, Jane was declared Queen of England. She was taken to the Tower of London, not as a prisoner, but as a queen. The crown was placed on her head, heavy enough that she could barely hold it upright. The courtiers bowed, but their smiles were thin, insincere. Jane was alone. One of her attendants, Tilly, later recalled that the only time Jane smiled was when she read a letter from her old tutor. In that brief moment, she was not a queen. She was just a girl. But the kingdom did not stand by her. It stood by Mary Tudor, Henry's eldest daughter, who had the unassailable claim. In just 9 days, Jane's reign ended. Northumberland was executed. Jane, her husband, and her father were arrested. And in a final act of cruelty, Frances, Jane's mother, abandoned her daughter, pleading with the new Queen Mary to spare her own life, leaving Jane to face the executioner alone. In February of 1554, Jane watched from her tower window as her young husband was LED'd to the scaffold. She saw the cart carrying his headless body passed by her room a few hours later. It was her turn, 17 years old. Calm, regal. She climbed the scaffold blindfolded, but as she reached for the block, she couldn't find it. What do I do? She cried in panic, where is it? A guard took her hand and guided it to the cold wood. And there, in one final terrible moment, the blood born from the forbidden love of Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon was paid for. The axe fell. Henry VIII's niece was dead. The king's revenge was complete. At least it seemed complete. The death of Lady Jane Grey should have been the bloody end to a story that had spanned generations. But blood is stubborn. Henry VIII may have thought he had wiped out the legacy of Mary Tudor when Jane's head rolled on the scaffold. But he had forgotten one thing. Jane had sisters Catherine and Mary Grey, and their lives would prove that the curse of that bloodline wasn't over. It would echo through the centuries. Catherine Grey was everything. Her bookish sister was not graceful, chill, charming, and according to all accounts, stunningly beautiful. But she carried the same dangerous heritage: the Tudor blood. Under Queen Elizabeth I, this was deadly. Elizabeth was famously unwilling to marry. or name a successor that meant Catherine. As a senior descendant of Henry VII's daughter, was considered by many to be the legitimate heir. In name, she was a living alternative to the Queen herself. And Elizabeth, like her father, was in a constant state of panic. Catherine knew the danger. She had witnessed her sister, Jane, die for a crown she never wanted. She should have stayed silent, lived in seclusion, but she fell in love. His name was Edward Seymour. They married in secret, and when Catherine's growing belly could no longer be hidden, Elizabeth's fury erupted. The Queen did not have her executed. No, she chose a more brutal punishment. Elizabeth declared Catherine's marriage invalid, her children illegitimate. And then she imprisoned her, moving her from one squalid castle to another, never allowing her to see her husband again. Catherine withered away, dying at 27. Officially from illness, but in truth from a broken heart. The youngest, Mary Grey, was born with a stunted frame and a curved spine. The court mocked her, treating her like a harmless figure, not a threat to anyone. But Mary also carried the Tudor flame, and like her sisters and great-grandmother before her, she dared to marry for love of her choice. A man far beneath her station, a junior officer serving the Queen. Elizabeth was not pleased with this act. Mary was also confined to her home, separated from her husband for many years. She died in obscurity, another victim of the curse. That began with a secret marriage in France, centuries before. The message from the royal family was brutally clear. This bloodline would never be allowed to thrive. It would be imprisoned, stripped, diluted until it disappeared. And for a time, it succeeded. The surviving children of Catherine Grey were declared illegitimate. They were stripped of royal closeness, reduced to minor nobility. Their descendants became country landowners, parish priests' wives of ministers. The fiery Tudor blood slowly thinned. Forgotten, hidden in the lower classes of English society. But blood has a way of finding cracks, of surviving in silence centuries past. The Tudors faded into history. The Stuarts rose and fell. The Hanoverians took the throne. And the Grey blood, the blood of Mary Tudor, quietly slinked into another family named Spencer. For many generations, the Spencer family was not royal. Not even close to royal, they were wealthy sheep farmers. Landowners known for stability and good business. Respected but unremarkable. Yet deep in their family tree, hidden like a forgotten inscription on an old medal, was the blood of Mary Tudor. Charles Brandon, Jane Grey, and Catherine Grey, it had survived waiting. Fast forward to the 20th century. John Spencer, the 8th Earl of Spencer, had a daughter, a shy, reserved girl with deep blue eyes full of dreams. She worked as a kindergarten assistant, completely removed from the glitz and glamour of royal life. Her name was Diana Frances Spencer. That middle name, Frances, was not chosen randomly. It was a surname passed down from her ancestors. Frances Brandon, the daughter of Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon. When Diana married Prince Charles, heir to the British throne, the world called it a fairy tale. a commoner marrying into royalty. But it was anything but. It was the greatest historical irony. The bloodline that Henry VIII had tried to erase. The family he had humiliated, imprisoned and made disappear, had now returned to the heart of the monarchy. Through Diana, the blood of Mary Tudor flowed back into the royal line. Through her, the genetic legacy of defiance and tragedy was restored. Her son, Prince William, is now the heir to the throne, carrying that bloodline, the same bloodline Henry VIII once deemed unworthy of power, the same bloodline that witnessed a 17-year-old girl being executed on the scaffold, the same bloodline that queens tried to suppress and kings tried to erase it has returned. It will sit on the throne. History is rarely a straight line. More often, it is a circle. Mary Tudor's choice to marry for love defied a king. It spawned a bloodline cursed by fear, shame, and death through generations. That bloodline was punished, stripped of status, forced into silence. Yet it survived, and centuries later, it returned not as a threat lurking in the shadows, but as the mother of a future king. So the next time you look at Princess Diana or her sons, William and Harry, look deeper. Beyond the name Spencer, beyond the name Windsor. See the shadow of another family. See Mary Tudor, the girl who chose love over duty. See Charles Brandon, the man who risked everything for her. See Lady Jane Grey, the young queen who bravely walked to her death. See Catherine and Mary Grey, who quietly endured for the love they refused to give up. Their story didn't vanish. It just waited, until a shy young woman named Diana brought it home. Perhaps that's why Diana touched the world's heart so deeply. She was not just the people's princess. She was something older, darker. More defiant, she was the vengeance of the Tudors. A bloodline once buried, once broken, now standing in the spotlight. A story that began in a dusty chapel in France, more than 500 years ago, sealed by a secret promise, still lives in the eyes of a future king.